You sit back down on your creaky cot, feeling marginally refreshed, if smelling like warm lard and boiled rags counts as refreshed. Then your tongue brushes against the back of your teeth. Huh, you run it along the front. Oof. Rough terrain. Something furry may be growing back there. You need to brush your teeth. You rummage through the washstand drawer. No plastic, no electric hum. Just a wooden handle, worn smooth by time, and bristles that look. Are those animal hairs? They are. Welcome to Victorian dental hygiene. You pick up the toothbrush. It's small, carved from bone or wood, with stiff horsehair bristles jammed into drilled holes and secured with wire. If you're lucky, the bristles won't fall out halfway through. If you're unlucky, one gets lodged between your molars like a tiny splinter of regret. Toothpaste, sure, just not the minty, creamy kind you know. Victorian tooth powders came in small tins or jars. Some were homemade, and the ingredients ranged from mildly questionable to, did they hate teeth on purpose? Crushed charcoal, brick dust, chalk, burnt bread crusts, baking soda and salt were common. The goal wasn't comfort, it was abrasion. You dab some of the gritty mix onto the bristles and scrub, hard. The powder scrapes against enamel with all the finesse of sandpaper. Your gums sting. There's a faint metallic taste. That's the iron from your bleeding gums. Not a fun copper-minted flavour. Historians still argue whether Victorian tooth powders actually helped or slowly eroded everyone's enamel into oblivion. The elite had their own concoctions, often made by apothecaries. Some even included opium or morphine for toothaches. Just a little pick-me-up with your plaque. You spit into the basin. The water turns a lovely shade of pink. You look in the mirror. Your teeth are still there, mostly, but they're not exactly white. Victorian smiles weren't what you'd call photogenic. Teeth were stained yellow or brown from tea, pipe smoke and time. And since dentistry was expensive, most folks didn't bother unless a tooth really started to hurt. If that happened, you'd visit the barber surgeon. Yeah, the same guy who gave you a trim would also pull your molars. Anesthetic? Nope. He'd grip the offending tooth with metal pliers and yank. If you passed out, he might finish the job anyway and hope you didn't sue. Not that you could. You paused to consider the other options. Some people rubbed their gums with sage or salt. Others used urine. That wasn't fringe. That was mainstream for a while. Aged urine was believed to whiten teeth. Technically, ammonia can clean things. But, you know what? Never mind. You step outside to clear your head and pass a man hawking tooth tincture from a cart. He waves a small brown bottle and shouts about miracles. The label promises fresh breath, strong gums and eternal youth. It probably contains alcohol, peppermint oil, and maybe cocaine. You decline. Barely. Children's dental care wasn't better. There wasn't a cute dinosaur-shaped brush or bubblegum-flavoured paste. Most kids didn't brush at all. Baby teeth fell out, and adult teeth came in, already decaying in many cases. Sugar was becoming more common, especially among the rising middle class. Candy, treacle, and syrup were popular. But fluoride didn't exist. Neither did routine dental visits. Toothaches were part of growing up. You duck into a wealthier part of town, hoping the upper class had it figured out. They could afford better tools, silver-handled brushes, imported powders, fancy rinses, but they weren't any more knowledgeable. Hygiene was a mix of fashion and folklore. You find a bougie lady's vanity, full of beauty products, rose-scented soap, a porcelain spittoon, and a set of Waterloo teeth they were called. That's not just grim. That's a nightmare with dentures. She smiles at you with perfect porcelain incisors. They don't fit quite right. Open scholarly debate exists about how often Victorians really brushed. Some diaries suggest twice a day among the wealthier crowd. Others mention only a weekly scrub. And outside of England, customs varied wildly. Some rural folks relied on chewing sticks or herbal rinses instead of brushes. One man wrote that he swished whiskey every morning and never had a cavity. Scientific? Not at all. Confident? Absolutely. And mouthwash? We'll get to that mess later. Back in your own quarters, you finish your dental routine, if it can be called that. by wiping your tongue with a rag and breathing into your palm. Verdict: still smells like desperation. You eye your neighbor across the hall. He's rubbing a coal-dusted finger along his gums and spitting into the fireplace. You ask him if he brushes. He shrugs and says he rinses with gin. He smiles, revealing a lonely row of survivors. 6 teeth, maybe 7. Victorian love letters often praised a woman's sweet breath or a man's strong jaw. That was code for, you haven't lost your teeth yet. Kissing, it happened. But between bad breath, decayed molars, and random bleeding, let's just say it wasn't the highlight of courtship. You lie back on your straw mattress and press a warm cloth to your cheek, not because it helps, but because you suspect a tooth is starting to throb. There's no aspirin, no floss, no dental plan. If this thing flares up, it's either a bottle of laudanum or a pair of pliers. And the worst part? You'll probably use the same toothbrush again tomorrow. Just rinse it in a little whiskey, hang it to dry, and pray the horse it came from had nice teeth. It's morning again, and guess what that means? Time to wrestle with your laundry. Not toss it in the machine and hit start laundry. No, this is Victorian laundry, the kind that requires muscles, patience, and a very, very high tolerance for pain, boredom, and mysterious stains. You peel off your shirt. It's stiff with yesterday's sweat and coal dust. The collar's gone yellow, the armpits are crunchy, and there's something unidentifiable on the hem. Could be gravy, could be blood, could be both. You hold it at arm's length and begin your quest. Wash day. First up, water. There's no tap, no hot and cold on command. You have to draw water from the communal pump at the corner, or maybe a hand-pulled well. Then carry the heavy, sloshing pail back to your flat without spilling it on your already gross boots. Repeat this a few times, unless you only plan to wash your socks and cry into them. You pour the water into a heavy iron wash tub, then set it over the fire or stove to heat. Slowly. Steam rises, soot clings to the pot's rim. The water doesn't boil exactly. It menaces you with warmth. It's not fast, but it's what you've got. You add soap, more of that gritty, lard-based wonder, or maybe soda ash if you're fancy. The scent is not great, kind of like wet dog and fireplace. You dunk your shirt in and start scrubbing. Not gentle spa style, this is full-on elbow grease. You use a washboard, ribbed metal or wood, and scrape the fabric against it, over and over. If you're lucky, the dirt comes off. If you're unlucky, so does half the fabric. Victorian cotton wasn't exactly durable, neither were your fingers. The term wash day wasn't an exaggeration. It took all day. Boiling, soaking, scrubbing, wringing, rinsing, drying, starching, ironing, folding. And that's if you weren't interrupted by a coal delivery, a screaming toddler, or someone in the tenement trying to light their stove with a firecracker again. Women usually did the laundry, and it was brutal work. Their hands cracked, their backs ached, their fingernails turned grey. Gloves. Ha! That was a luxury. Plus, the steam from the wash house would fog up the whole room, turning your one window into a dripping wall of misery. Clothes were sorted by priority. Undergarments, worn closest to the body, got washed most often, maybe once a week. Outer garments, once every few months. Coats, when hell froze over. And if something couldn't be washed, like wool, it was aired out, which meant flapping it outside and pretending the wind had magical cleansing powers. Quirky fact: some people believed moonlight could bleach whites, so you'd see clothes hanging outside overnight, hoping the lunar rays would work their invisible magic. Spoiler: stains were attacked with home remedies. Ink, try milk. Grass, rub in raw potato. Blood, saliva, or cold water. People swore by ox gall, lemon juice, even kerosene. If that didn't work, you could always just dye the garment darker and hope nobody noticed. After scrubbing came wringing. Imagine twisting a soaked sheet until the water stops dripping. With no machine to help, it's just you and your biceps, which are now burning. Then rinse, again, by hand. And then it's time to dry. Drying is a gamble. If it's sunny, great. clotheslines and pegs. If it's raining, foggy or smoggy, which is always, tough luck. Clothes hung indoors over chairs, railings, or ropes strung across the room. Everything smelt like damp wool and lukewarm lard. Again. You look around the laundry room. It's communal. That means you're surrounded by other sweaty, red-faced people doing the exact same thing. There's gossip. There's shouting. There's one older woman who's probably the neighborhood boss, and she will absolutely scold you if you fold your linens wrong. And here's a fringe detail. Some families reused wash water. First the whites, then the colors, then the dirtiest rags last. Efficiency, sure. Hygiene, debatable. Historians still argue whether reusing grey water helped spread skin infections or simply kept everyone at the same low standard of cleanliness. You catch a glimpse of your own reflection in the soapy water. You look exhausted. Your shirt's sort of clean, sort of not. The collar's gone limp, but the stain's mostly faded. It's not good, but it's done. Ironing, by the way, isn't a break. You have to heat a heavy cast iron on the stove, test the temperature with a flick of water or a quick touch, then glide it across your garment without leaving burn marks or catching it on buttons. Too hot, and it scorches. Too cold, and it's pointless. You lay the shirt flat. Steam hisses up. Your hands still tremble from the scrubbing. The room is stifling. Someone nearby is boiling socks and the smell of foot-scented steam wafts past your nose. You try not to gag. Someone else drops their entire wash tub. The slosh sounds like a small wave hitting a beach made of disappointment. Finally, you fold your laundry. It's a modest pile. One shirt, 2 pairs of underdrawers, some socks. That's it. That's your entire wearable world. People didn't own closets full of options. The average Victorian labourer had 1 or 2 sets of clothing, maybe 3 if they were prosperous or lucky. Clothes weren't fashion, they were armour, literal cloth shields against the world's dirt and judgment. You stagger back to your room with the damp bundle. Drying will take hours, maybe days. If you're desperate, you'll wear it before it's fully dry. Just accept the feeling of damp fabric clinging to your back. That's part of the experience. Laundry isn't just a chore in this era. It's a ritual, a sacrifice of time, energy, and skin. It binds communities and breaks backs. You now understand why the phrase, "don't air your dirty laundry in public," existed, because honestly, no one wants to see it. Or smell it. You collapse onto your straw mattress again, arms sore, knuckles raw, and suddenly very grateful for modern washing machines. You're lying flat, staring at the ceiling, still slightly damp from yesterday's tragic bath and today's fight with laundry. But then you feel it. The pressure in your gut, the twist, the biological signal that says, it's time. You need to go. But you are not in 2025. You are in Victorian England, where indoor plumbing is a mythical luxury, and toilet paper isn't exactly part of the daily routine, so what now? First stop, your chamber pot. You lift the lid with dread. It's a small ceramic bowl tucked under your bed. Delicate looking, maybe even painted with little blue flowers, because Victorians had a twisted sense of aesthetics. It's meant for nighttime emergencies, not daytime comfort. But you're desperate. You do what you must. You try not to think about the sound it makes, or the heat, or the smell, which immediately lets you know why the phrase night soil exists. Victorian homes didn't smell like cinnamon candles. They smelled like people. Real, bodily, unapologetically organic people. You cover the pot with its lid and slide it back under the bed like a dirty secret. But now there's a full bowl of, well, you, just squatting beneath your sleeping space like some fermented pet. Time to empty it. You carry the chamber pot gingerly down a narrow hall, past your neighbour, who nods in solidarity, pot in hand, and down the stairs. There's no garbage chute, no designated toilet. There's a privy in the backyard, a shared wooden shack that leans slightly to one side like it knows what goes on inside and would rather not be involved. You open the door. The smell hits you first. Earthy, sharp, mouldy. The hole in the bench is dark and infinite. Flies buzz. The wood underfoot is always damp and you try not to think about what causes that. There's no flush, just gravity and denial. You dump the pot and leave quickly. Rich people, of course, had other options. They might have a water closet, a small room with a flushing toilet, invented in the 18th century but still rare and expensive by mid-Victorian times. Early flush toilets were complicated, loud, and occasionally backfired. Literally, water pressure was inconsistent, and sewer gas could bubble up and, well, surprise. Some aristocrats used commodes, ornate chairs with holes in the seat and ceramic basins below. Imagine a toilet disguised as furniture. Discreet? Sure. Hygienic? Not even close. A servant had to remove the basin and clean it, probably while holding their breath and contemplating career changes. And toilet paper? Not happening. You scan the room for supplies. There's newspaper, corn husks, bits of cloth. Some people used moss or leaves. Others just bidden. You remember reading about a guest in a posh home who used the monogrammed drapery out of desperation. They were not invited back. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Victorians had a popular novelty item called the toilet paper substitute. Thin pages from old catalogues, especially the Sears Roebuck or British mail order listings. Printed material was absorbent and informative. Talk about multitasking. Back in the city, the waste, human and otherwise, had to go somewhere. Enter the night soil men. They worked at night, of course, because nobody wanted to see or smell what they did in daylight. They hauled away the contents of cesspools and privies using large barrels or wagons, sometimes by hand, sometimes using shoulder straps. Always with a grim expression and a deep sense of resignation. They were paid decently but shunned socially. The smell clung to them. No cologne could cover it. Children crossed the street when they passed. Still, without them, cities would have drowned in their own filth. Your tenement, like many others, connected to a haphazard sewer system, if you're lucky. Before the 1868, much of London's waste flowed through open gutters into the Thames. That same Thames where people washed, bathed and fished. Cholera outbreaks were common. People didn't yet understand waterborne bacteria. They just thought the smell made them sick. Hence the miasma theory again. Small equals disease. Historians still argue whether the infamous 1854 cholera outbreak was the turning point. It should have been. Dr. John Snow, no, not the one from the wall, traced the outbreak to a contaminated water pump in Soho. He removed the pump handle and the epidemic slowed. It was one of the first real demonstrations of waterborne illness in action, but many people didn't believe him at the time. Ill habits and bad plumbing die hard. Back in your flat, you splash some water on your hands from the basin. No soap, just a rinse. Maybe a shared rag, stiff and sour smelling. There's no antibacterial anything. Germ theory is still gaining traction, so most people think washing your hands after bathroom use is optional, even weird. You make a note to try not to shake anyone's hand today, or ever again. Some homes kept chamber pots in every bedroom. Others had a slop jar in the kitchen. And yes, it was exactly what it sounds like. In crowded housing blocks, it was common to toss the contents out the window with a shouted warning, usually something like, "Gardez-les," with a glass over the water. You don't always get the warning. The sidewalks ran with it. That's not poetic exaggeration. That's daily life. You start to understand the Victorian obsession with boots. High, tough, and wipeable. Floors were not clean, streets were worse, and privacy, laughable. You might share a privy with a dozen neighbours. You might share a bed with a sibling, or two. There were no personal boundaries when it came to bodily functions. Just survival and silent nods of understanding. One more thing. There's a superstition floating around that women shouldn't relieve themselves during a full moon. Something about attracting spirits, or weakening the womb. You ask your landlady. She waves it off and says it's just an excuse to keep people from wandering outside at night and getting mugged. So yeah, you've done it. You've braved the Victorian bathroom gauntlet. You've dumped the pot, survived the flies, and rinsed your fingers in what might have been muck water. And now you need to lie down again. You're already sweating. You wake up again, though at this point, waking up feels more like resurfacing from a damp fog of discomfort. Your scalp itches, not a polite little tickle, but a deep, crawling sensation that makes your whole head feel like it's hosting a garden party for insects. Do you scratch? Bad idea. Now your fingers smell like old oil and maybe bread mold. You grab the hand mirror from the washstand, you part your hair, you lean in closer. There it is. A louse. Tiny, grey, crawling like it owns the place. Congratulations, you now have company. And you're not alone. Head lice are basically the unofficial pet of the Victorian age. Hygiene back then wasn't just about smell, it was about the quiet infestation happening right above the eyebrows. For many Victorians, itching wasn't a sign that something was wrong, it was just life. You grab your hairbrush, a heavy wooden one with stiff boar bristles. It's supposed to help. It doesn't. The lice are in too deep. Eggs, nits, blowing to your hair shafts like stubborn little barnacles. There were treatments, of course. Most started with combs, fine-toothed metal and savage. The kind of comb that scraped not just lice, but also dignity from your scalp. You drag it through your hair and wince. The teeth catch, something crunches. You don't want to know. If you had money, you could try special hair oils, camphor, kerosene, vinegar, or turpentine. Yes, turpentine. Because nothing says relaxing hair care like slathering paint thinner onto your skull. Some people even used mercury-based treatments. They worked, kind of. They also slowly poisoned you. Historians still argue whether these lice cures helped, or simply rearranged the bugs into new neighborhoods on your scalp. You decide to try dry shampoo, Victorian style, flour, cornstarch, or powdered charcoal. You sprinkle it into your hair and rub it in. Your scalp now looks like a poorly dusted pastry, but at least the grease is gone. Sort of. You move on to other people's hair. A woman next door is braiding hers. It's thick, long, and clearly unwashed, but neatly styled. That's key. Victorian women didn't wash their hair often, maybe once every few weeks. Some waited months. Instead, they brushed it. 100 strokes a night. Not to clean it, exactly, but to redistribute the oils and hopefully remove some dust and lice in the process. You join in, you count your brush strokes, you try to pretend you're fancy. And then you notice, she's scratching too. Children were even worse off. Schoolhouses were breeding grounds for lice. Kids shared combs, hats and blankets without thinking. Infestations were common, and often ignored unless they became severe. A child could walk around with a full bug colony under their bonnet, and the response would just be a casual, "Keep your head out of the pudding bowl, dear." You pass a boy on the stairwell picking at his scalp with a spoon handle. He offers it to you when he's done. You decline, politely. Then burn the memory forever. Let's not forget body hair. Victorian standards weren't obsessed with shaving, at least not the way modern beauty industries are. Armpits, legs, and other areas were mostly left alone. Razors were crude, and creams were questionable. One popular depilatory contained arsenic. You'd spread it on, feel the burn, and wipe the hair. As for pubic hair, mostly left alone, except when it wasn't. Yes, we're getting there. No spoilers. Men, meanwhile, weren't much cleaner. They used pomades to slick their hair into submission. Ingredients included bear grease, beef tallow, lard, and wax. Not only did these concoctions attract dust and dirt, but they also made hair smell, sweet, cloying, sweaty smell, layered over old fat. To keep their pomade pots clean, men often wore nightcaps to bed. Long fabric hats that looked like elf attire, but were really just oil absorbers. You try one on, it's damp, you take it off again. Fringe tip. Some people boiled their combs to sterilize them. Others just rubbed them on their trousers and called it good. One woman swore by leaving her brush on a windowsill overnight to air out the demons. Speaking of demons, there were actual superstitions about hair. Cutting your hair during certain moon phases was said to prevent headaches. Letting someone else touch your hair could invite bad luck or spiritual invasion. So lice weren't just pests. They were metaphysical interlopers, depending on who you asked. You run your fingers through your hair again. It's matted now, a little gritty. There might be a dead louse near your ear, or maybe it's just build-up from flour and despair. You consider a haircut? But in this era, hair is identity. Women are judged by the length and sheen of their tresses. To cut it short is scandalous, unless you're mourning or sick. Some even sell their hair to wig makers. There's a whole market for it. Locks are measured, weighed, and turned into extensions or funeral wreaths. You meet a wig maker who offers you a penny per inch. You decline, barely. Men cut their hair more regularly, often at the barber, but even barbers weren't consistent about hygiene. The same scissors touched dozens of scalps, some crawling with bugs, some with sores. There were no gloves, no sanitizing jars, just a cloth, a brush, and a silent prayer. You notice a young man wearing a bowler hat indoors. Not rude, just strategic. Hats hid grease, lice, bald patches and dandruff. People kept their hats on during dinner, conversation, even prayer. Not out of fashion, out of necessity. And beneath all this, literally, was the headscarf. Women wrapped their hair at night to keep it neat, or to keep bugs from crawling onto the pillow, or both. You lie back, head wrapped in an old kerchief. You feel something move. Maybe it's a trick of your imagination. Maybe it's another louse plotting its next tour. Either way, you close your eyes and hope tomorrow brings a better comb. Or a fire. You wake up groggy, your scalp still tingling from yesterday's comb battle. You try not to scratch. It's not working. But today, there's another challenge waiting. One that doesn't crawl on your head, but squeezes around your ribs like a judgmental python. Time to get dressed. You reach for your undergarments, drawers, which don't reach your ankles. A chemise, basically a nightgown you wear under your clothes, and the corset. Ah yes, the infamous corset. Stiff, boned, and socially mandatory. It doesn't matter that you barely slept, or that your ribs still ache from laughing too hard last Tuesday. If you're a woman, and you want to be decent, the corset goes on. Period. You loop the laces around your fingers and start pulling, slowly at first, then tighter. It bites. You feel your stomach tuck in, your chest push up, and your lungs struggle. There's a reason Victorian women fainted in parlours. It wasn't emotional fragility, it was restricted airflow. Some corsets had steel boning, others used baleen, yep, from Wales. Flexible, yes. Comfortable, nope, not even close. Some had front busks, long pieces of rigid metal to keep you standing tall and shamefully upright. Posture mattered. Slouching was a sin. So was breathing too loud. You cinch it tighter. Your waist disappears. You can't slouch, or bend, or really sit in comfort, but at least you look respectable, right? Historians still argue whether corsets permanently reshaped women's bodies. X-rays show rib compression, organ shifting, even spinal issues in chronic wearers. Some claim the dangers were exaggerated. Others argue women were literally crushed under social pressure and boning. And it gets worse, because over the corset, more layers, a crinoline or bustle to shape your skirt, petticoats, an underskirt, a skirt, a bodice, maybe a shawl, maybe a jacket. You're basically layering yourself into a walking cake. Now it's summer. There's no air conditioning, no deodorant. You're sweating, but you can't feel it, because the fabric is soaking it up like a sponge. The corset's trapping heat, the skirts are trapping your legs, and your body is slowly stewing in its own juices. You step outside, the breeze hits your face, everything below the neck, still cooking. You pass a shop window and glimpse yourself, upright, composed, silent. You look put together. You feel like a hot, oxygen-starved sausage. You try walking. Not fast. You can't. You take short, gliding steps. The corset won't let you do otherwise. Victorian women were taught to walk with elegance. But really, it was just learning to cope with a spinal cage and no freedom of motion. And men, they had their own misery. Starched collars, wool suits, waistcoats, boots. in winter and summer. There's a belief that layering prevents sweat. It doesn't. It just hides it, briefly, until it soaks through every piece of cloth and adds another note to the daily human soup of odors. Most men wore wool against their skin. Wool, the itchiest, thickest, least breathable fabric on earth. Pair that with heavy coats and top hats, and you've got yourself a full-body Evan. Victorian sweat wasn't a trickle, it was a state of being. One fringe tidbit: some corsets were advertised as hygienic, lined with charcoal or herbs to fight odor. Others had perforated panels to promote airflow. Sounds fancy, smelled terrible. You could still faint in public, and now you'd smell like minty despair. You walk into a drawing room to cool off. It's stuffy, curtains closed, windows locked to keep out the London stink. There's a fireplace. It's summer. It's still burning. You wipe your forehead discreetly with a handkerchief. Heaven forbid someone sees your actual skin moisture. Some women used pads, literally cloth pads, to soak up sweat beneath their arms or along their backs. They tied them in place with little ribbons. Others powdered their bodies with starch or talc. But that didn't stop the sweat. It just made it dusty, like baking a damp cake in a layer of flour. Men carried pocket squares or dabbed their brows with gloves. White gloves usually, to really highlight the grime. Now try using the privy while wearing all this. You need to unlace, unbutton, lift, balance. There are stories of women fainting in outhouses because they couldn't undress fast enough in the heat. Getting dressed was hard. Getting undressed was harder. Victorians basically had to schedule their bowel movements around their outfits. You sit down, finally, and feel the corset dig into your ribs. It doesn't bend with you. It punishes you for resting. You shift. It creaks. The metal inside warms with your body heat and starts to warp. The laces tug. Your spine groans. No wonder fainting couches were a thing. They weren't just for drama. They were for survival. Men had it marginally easier, but only barely. A tight collar could cause headaches. Starched shirts could cut into skin. There are accounts of men passing out in church from heat exhaustion, but at least they could loosen their cravat. Women, if you unlace in public, you're indecent, scandalous, possibly possessed. Even children weren't spared. Girls wore training corsets. Yes, training. Corsets. For kids. To shape them early into proper young ladies. Toddlers in whalebone armor. Why? Because good posture was more important than comfort. Or breathing. You stand again, moving slowly, aware of every tight seam and scratchy hem. You're not walking. You're surviving inside a fabric fortress. A hot, unventilated one. And remember, laundry day is once a week at best. That means you're wearing this sweaty, constrictive outfit again tomorrow. And the next day. The smell builds, the seams get stiff, the underarms darken, and deodorant still doesn't exist. So you smile, you sit up straight, you glide like a dream, and you sweat in silence, just like everybody else. You make your way down the soot-dark stairwell, dodging a mop bucket and a cat that may or may not belong to the building. Outside, a group of men lounges near the alley, laughing over a tin flask. One tips his hat. You nod, and then freeze. This beard. It's magnificent. And by magnificent you mean enormous, unkempt, and clearly housing a few crumbs, a twig, and maybe a full-baked bean. Victorian facial hair isn't just fashion, it's habitat. You walk closer and catch a whiff. It's a complicated scent. Pipe smoke, stale ale, and that lingering something that makes you wonder if he used beef drippings as beard oil. And he might have. Grooming products were few. Homemade, or horrifying. But a beard? That was status. Masculinity. A dirt trap you could wear with pride. During the mid to late 1800s, facial hair made a big comeback. Beards were suddenly noble again, especially after the Crimean War. Soldiers came back with beards, because shaving in the trenches was optional at best. and civilians adopted the look like it had mystical powers. A proper beard meant strength, wisdom, virility. Hygiene. Men rarely washed them daily. A quick comb, maybe a rinse, and some pomade if they were feeling fancy. Pomades often contained ingredients like bear fat, petroleum jelly, or lanolin scraped from sheep's wool. You'd warm it with your fingers, smear it through the whiskers, and hope it didn't attract cats. You spot another man trimming his moustache with pocket scissors. He's being precise, careful to maintain that upside-down walrus style that screams gentleman with opinions. But when he's done, he tucks the scissors into his breast pocket. No rinse, no case, just ready for next time, or for slicing fruit, who knows. Here's a fringe detail. Some men used beard nets at night. Yes, nets, to keep their facial hair tidy while they slept. They looked like fish caught in string hammocks. Others used tiny curling irons to shape their mustaches into points or waves. There were even specialized waxes to keep the ends curled all day long. Smelled like pine tar and soap scum. Historians still argue whether this obsession with beards was more about rebellion or hygiene laziness. Some sources say it was a pushback against the smooth-shaven Georgian period. Others suggest men just got tired of cutting themselves every morning with dull razors and cold water. Can you blame them? Razor blades were brutal. Straight razors, those long folding knives, required skill. A barber could use one to cleanly shave your face or accidentally decapitate your social life with one wrong slip. Men who shaved at home often nicked themselves into a pulp and walked around with tiny bits of newspaper stuck to their cheeks like depressing confetti. You walk into a barber's shop, it smells like bay rum and hair oil. A man is halfway through a shave, white foam covering his face like frosting. The barber's blade glints in the lamplight. He's steady, but the towel the last guy used is still hanging on the hook, damp, grey, and absolutely bacteria-rich. Barbers didn't sterilize tools, not really. They wiped blades on cloth, maybe dunked a comb in water and called it good. If you left the shop without a new infection, it was a miracle. Still, people went. Because getting a shave was about more than grooming. It was ritual, a moment of luxury for the working man, a place to gossip, argue politics, and pretend for 15 minutes that you weren't covered in coal dust and sadness. You sit in the corner and watched. A man leans back in the chair, closes his eyes and lets the barber lathe his beard with a stiff bristled brush. The soap smells strong. Not pleasant, just strong. Some barbers used homemade concoctions, lye, tallow, maybe a splash of gin. It got the job done. Kind of. The barber finishes and wipes the blade on his apron. You make a mental note to never ever ask for a shave unless it's life or death, probably death. Outside, men adjust their collars and fluff their beards. Beard length is like a resume. A long beard means wisdom, or a lifetime of not caring what soup does to your chin. Some beards are forked, some braided, some patchy but persistent. A few are so bushy they could hide an entire pigeon. Beard contests weren't official yet, but trust me, the silent judging was real. You head back toward your building and pass a man wearing a fake beard. Yes, fake. Some poor souls couldn't grow them naturally, so they strapped on woolen or horsehair creations and hoped no one noticed. Spoiler, people noticed. But as long as it looked like masculinity, it counted. One more thing. Men didn't just grow beards, they perfumed them. A dab of musk or lavender oil in the chin fluff, and boom, romantic hero, ready to cough up a hairball. You walk past one such dandy, and your eyes water from the combination of sandalwood and sweat. It's like being punched by a scented candle that's been left in a barn. Women weren't entirely safe either. They had to sit next to, ride in carriages with, and occasionally marry these walking compost piles. Courtship came with sideburns. Passion came with moustache wax. Weddings smelt like violets and vinegar. You make it to your room, still smelling someone else's cologne beard blend in your nostrils. You sit down. You rub your own jaw. It's rough. A little itchy. If you stay here long enough, you'll have a beard too. And no idea what's living in it. You crack open your window, just a sliver, hoping for fresh air. What you get instead is a slow-moving cloud of chimney smoke, fried herring, and what might be the ghost of someone's expired cheese. You shut it again and sit back, sighing. Time for plan B, perfume. You open a tin box and pull out a small bottle, amber glass, wax-sealed, labeled something like Eau de Violette or Gentleman's Pine Musk. The label's peeling, the cork is suspect, and the contents smell like a meadow dipped in alcohol and slightly spoiled soap. Still, it's better than what's coming off your shirt collar right now. You dab some behind your ears, on your wrists, and just for good measure, around your collar. The scent stings your nose, but smothers the more aggressive smells clinging to your body. This is how you fight back in the age before deodorant. By layering smells until the strongest wins. In Victorian England, perfume wasn't just cosmetic, it was defense, a wearable barrier between you and everyone else's filth. Bathing was rare, clothes weren't washed often, so people covered the stench with rose water, lavender oil, musk and citrus peels. Men used cologne, women used scented sachets tucked into their bodices or pinned to undergarments. Think of it like Febreze for your armpits, but handmade, flammable, and probably more symbolic than effective. And here's where it gets weirder. Many perfumes were alcohol-based, and quite a few had medicinal claims. Some promised to revive fainting women, smelling salts in a bottle. Others boasted protection against miasmus, aka bad air. Because remember, they still believed smell could make you sick. Historians still argue whether these perfumes did more harm than good. Sure, they helped people tolerate one another, but covering up bad odors meant people ignored actual sources of disease, rotting meat, sewage leaks, infected wounds. If it smelled fine, it must be fine. Right. You walk into a shop that sells scents, more like a dusty apothecary than a luxury boutique. Shelves of glass bottles, wax-sealed jars, and little pouches of herbs. The air is so thick with competing fragrances, it could probably knock out a small mammal. A shopgirl waves you toward the gentleman's selection, where notes of cedar, bergamot, and something disturbingly like smoked ham await. She offers you a whiff of Night Traveler, a cologne made with clove oil, tobacco leaf, and crushed violets. You take a cautious sniff. It smells like a library that caught fire. You nod politely and pick the one that least resembles flavored meat. Perfumes weren't just for body odor, homes smelled too. Coal fires, unwashed laundry, chamber pots. People burned incense or boiled orange peels with spices to mask the scent. One aristocratic trend was to keep bowls of potpourri in every room. Another was the pomander, a perforated metal ball filled with herbs or resin, hung on a ribbon and worn around the neck or wrist. Some took it further. They soaked handkerchiefs in perfume and held them to their nose while walking through particularly bad parts of town, i.e., most of it. You start to understand why the dainty handkerchief became such a social staple. It was basically mobile air quality control. You return to the tenement and pass a woman dabbing perfume behind her ears before heading out. Her dress is faded, her boots worn, but her scent, bold. It's a statement. I may not be clean, but I smell like someone who could be. That was the goal, projecting cleanliness, even if it was a lie. Like a teenager, drowning themselves in body spray instead of showering. Different era. Same strategy. And it wasn't just natural scents. The Victorians loved animal-based perfumes too. Musk, from musk deer. Civet, from a cat-like creature's glands. Ambergris. Literally whale vomit. These were prized base notes. Rich, earthy, complex. Also, disgusting if you knew the source. But if the Queen wore it, so did everyone else. You lie back in bed, sniffing your collar. The perfume is still there, though faintly mixed with your own notes. You're a walking blend of pine, lavender, and overcooked humanity. Here's a fringe tidbit. There was a popular belief that scent could reveal character. A man who smelled of tobacco and leather was manly. A woman who smelled like lilies was pure. Smell wasn't just about hygiene, it was morality, class, and virtue. You remember someone mentioning that prostitutes often wore heavy, sweet perfumes to both attract clients and cover the fact that their bath count for the month stood at 0. Florals, spices, citrus, all layered thick, like armor. Some men found it alluring, others found it overwhelming. But it worked. The scent said what your words couldn't. Now imagine you're trying to seduce someone in this era. You lean in close. There's no guarantee what you'll find. Floral perfume, yes, but also sweat, stale powder, possibly mothballs, maybe a hint of decay from a dress that hasn't seen water in weeks. And yet, if it smelled expensive, it passed. One final note. You could also buy perfume-soaked gloves, fans, and even stationery. Love letters that reeked of roses, fans that exhaled lilac every time you cooled yourself. Gloves that made handshakes smell like sandalwood. Practical? Not really. Luxurious? Absolutely. You sit upright and dab your wrist again with your fading cologne. You're no cleaner than you were this morning, but you smell cleaner. And in this world, that's half the battle. The other half, hoping no one gets close enough to call your bluff. You lean back in your chair, stretching your arms above your head, feeling slightly more human thanks to your dabs of lavender-soaked deception. But as you settle, the itchy discomfort you've been ignoring makes a grand return. Down. And this time it's not lice, it's worse. You remember something someone muttered yesterday, half joking and half terrified. Beware the velvet crab. You thought it was a pub name. It wasn't. You shift uncomfortably. The truth is, Victorian undercarriage hygiene was not ideal. And that discomfort you're feeling? There were options, just not good ones. You shuffle toward your trunk and reach for the small cloth pouch buried beneath your chemise. Inside is your last resort, your secret weapon, your fabric friend, a merkin. Yes, a pubic wig. You hold it up and stare. It's made of tightly curled horsehair, dyed an unnatural shade of auburn. It has tiny ties meant to be fastened around the hips. It looks like something that escaped from a toy factory. You wonder who made it. You wonder why. Merkin use dates back centuries, but in Victorian times they had a resurgence. Not for fashion, but for cover-up. Prostitutes often shaved to combat lice and syphilitic sores, which, yes, were horrifyingly common, then wore merkins to disguise the results. It helped preserve the illusion of health. No hair, something's wrong. Fake hair, everything's fine. You see the logic. It's bleak. You don't put it on, yet, but it stays on the washstand like a warning label from another era. Victorian sexual health was a walking contradiction. Outwardly, society demanded modesty, purity, self-control, but privately, infection ran rampant. Brothels thrived. Sticky lives like syphilis and gonorrhea spread through all levels of society. And nobody, not even doctors, really understood what they were dealing with. One popular cure for syphilis was mercury, rubbed on sores, inhaled as vapor, injected. The treatment often caused more damage than the disease. Historians still argue whether mercury actually prolonged life or just made people die more interestingly. Women especially suffered. They were expected to be pure, yet had little knowledge of how their bodies worked. Many were infected by their own husbands, men who frequented brothels, then came home and passed along more than just bedtime stories. And when things down there got uncomfortable, the solutions were wildly inconsistent. Some women douched with vinegar, others used carbolic acid. One fringe recommendation was to apply mashed onion. It did not go well. Doctors, all male, wrote endlessly about female hysteria, the idea that women's emotional instability stemmed from their reproductive organs. Treatments included cold baths, electric shocks, or, in especially compassionate cases, manual pelvic massage. Yes, that kind. Performed in clinics, professionally, with doctor's orders. You could not make this up. You try to clean yourself with a damp cloth, avoiding eye contact with the mirror. There's no running water, no sanitary wipes. You're using a rag you boiled last week and hope it still counts as sterile. Undergarments didn't help. Panties weren't universal yet. Most women wore open-crotched drawers under layers of skirts. The air circulation helped a little, but when you're sitting on a horsehair bus seat next to a man whose cologne smells like scorched pine cone, nothing really feels clean. You remember seeing an ad for feminine powders. They were mostly starch, sometimes mixed with zinc or crushed rose petals. Their job? Keep the area dry. Not healthy, just dry. The scent of mildew with a floral note. You tried it once, never again. And toilet hygiene? A joke. Toilet paper wouldn't become common until the 1880s, and even then it was a luxury. Most women wiped with cloth, moss, or pages from catalogues. The pages with the corset ads were thickest. Now imagine menstruating. We'll go deep on that soon, but for now let's say it wasn't discreet, it wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't sanitary. You slip into your chemisy again and notice the uncomfortable scratch of yesterday's starch still hiding in the seams. Laundry day was 3 days ago. Everything's already stale again. The smell rising from your own body makes your eyes water, and you know it's not just sweat. It's yeast, heat, and fabric that's never truly clean. You pass by a friend, Lucy, who sells ribbons by the theatre. She leans in and whispers that one of her clients asked if she'd shave down there. She giggles nervously, says she used a razor meant for legs, and nearly sliced herself in half. You both laugh, but it's nervous laughter. You've had the same thought. Hair removal wasn't standard, but for some it was strategic. Fewer lice, fewer smells, fewer reminders of the last client. Waxing wasn't common, shaving was dangerous, and creams? Corrosive. One famous product claimed to dissolve hair with elegance. It also burned a hole in a woman's thigh. Sit down, carefully. You stare at the merkin again. Its curls gleam under the lamplight, cheerful and absurd. Then you think about the double standard. Men could scratch themselves in public. Women had to sit perfectly still while dealing with itching, burning, or worse. A man with an infection got a lecture. A woman got a reputation. And still, people managed to be intimate. They found each other in dim rooms, under layers of musk and modesty, hoping whatever lurked beneath the corset would behave for one more night. You lie back and exhale. The fabric shifts against your skin. The discomfort simmers. You close your eyes, aware of every inch of your body and what it's hiding. And you pray you won't need the merkin tomorrow. You wake up to the sound of water sloshing. Not a leak, not a storm. It's bath day. Sort of. You step outside your tenement and follow the trail of wet footprints, soap bubbles and arguments. They lead to the local public bathhouse, which sounds way fancier than it actually is. It's less of a spa and more of a hot, tiled waiting room for bacterial roulette. You pay your few pennies at the front desk, or, if you're truly broke, you wait for free hour. The one time a week the poor are allowed to bathe for nothing, assuming they're willing to wait in a line that wraps around the block. You're not rich, but today you got in early. The attendant points you toward a room. You open the door to find a tub. Not a private room with flowers and steam and classical music, just a metal basin of lukewarm, probably reused water, and a small shelf with communal soap. A single bar. Already slippery, already melting. You strip behind a thin curtain which stops precisely nothing. The person in the next stall coughs loudly. The tub smells like boiled feet and lavender. You step in. Instant regret. The water's only ankle deep and already tepid. There's hair floating in it. Possibly someone else's toe skin. Definitely someone else's sweat. You lower yourself in anyway, because in this era, beggars cannot be scrubbers. Public baths became common in Victorian England, not out of compassion, but desperation. The Industrial Revolution jammed thousands of people into cities with no plumbing, no running water, and no privacy. Diseases were rampant. So cities introduced bathhouses as a public health measure. Historians still argue whether they actually helped. On one hand, yes, bathing is good. On the other hand, hundreds of people sharing the same water, same cloth, same soap and same air meant these places became hotbeds of infection. You weren't just washing away grime, you were swimming through a soup of everyone else's. You grab the soap. It's gritty, made of animal fat and lye. It stings. There's no loofah, just a worn rag. You scrub as best you can, trying to avoid eye contact with the person in the stool next to you, whose leg is somehow sticking into yours. There are no drains, just buckets. When you're done, you're expected to dump your water outside or into a designated trench. The next bather? They might get a fresh fill, if the staff isn't lazy. Or they might get your leftovers. You hear a child shriek. Someone just sat on something slippery. Public bathhouses came in different flavors. Some were nicer, especially those built later in the century. Some even had warm rooms and massage tables. The vast majority? Cold, wet, echoing chambers, full of naked strangers and damp air. No fans, no ventilation. Just steam clinging to every surface like a second sour-smelling skin. You glance at the bathhouse rules nailed to the wall. No loitering, no shouting, no indecent behavior. That last one makes you nervous. Because yes, some people used these places for other purposes. Prostitution, secret rendezvous, even theft. There were stories of men having their clothes stolen while they bathed, left with only a towel and shame. You lean your head back and stare at the stained ceiling. The paint is peeling, mold dots the corners. You imagine all the microbes drifting through the air like invisible mosquitoes. And the staff? Overworked, underpaid, in charge of policing bathers, refilling water, emptying tubs, and yelling at children who tried to use soap as a toy. You nod at the girl scrubbing the walls. She looks 12. She nods back. Her hands are raw. A fringe tidbit. Some bathhouses offered medical baths. You could pay extra to soak in sulfur water, seawater, or even electric water. Baths with copper rods and low-voltage currents promised to cure arthritis, gout, and hysteria. Mostly they just tingled and gave you a rash. The idea of hygiene as a public duty was still new. For centuries, washing was private or religious. But by the Victorian age, cleanliness was marketed as moral. A clean body meant a clean soul. Cities installed public drinking fountains, bathhouses, and even sanitary inspectors who'd knock on your door and judge your filth. You rinse off, but the water's worse than when you started. You stand and reach for a towel. There isn't one. You forgot to bring your own. The attendant sighs and tosses you a thin, scratchy rag. It smells like wet rope and mildew. You wrap it around yourself and shuffle back to the dressing stool. The curtain flaps open as you pull on your drawers. A boy peeks in. You make eye contact. He runs. That's the level of privacy you're working with here. You're still damp as you put your outer clothes on. Wool over cotton, over sweat, over sadness. The clean feeling lasts maybe 3 minutes. Then the air hits you. The smoke, the street stink, the warm animal aroma of the tenement next door. You're resoiling yourself with every breath. By the time you get home, your boots are muddy again, your collar is damp with neck sweat, and you already miss the bath that you just swore you'd never do again. But here's the thing. You do feel better. Just slightly. Even if you smell like lard soap and despair, your skin doesn't itch, your scalp isn't crawling, your fingernails aren't grey. And in Victorian England that counts as a win. The sun dips low over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the alley as you step gingerly around another puddle of, well, let's just call it liquid history. You've survived the public bath, but now you're faced with a much darker reality. Literally darker. Because tonight, the night soil men are coming. You catch the first scent before you see them. Sharp, earthy, sickly sweet. It's a smell that doesn't announce itself so much as invade. You cover your mouth with your handkerchief, but it's pointless. Nothing helps. The stink is in the air, the ground, the walls. It clings like a curse. Then you see them. 2 men pushing a massive cart with wooden barrels strapped to it. The wheels groan. One man wears thick gloves, the other doesn't. Their clothes are stained, their boots unrecognizable beneath layers of grime. They barely talk, just grunt, nod, shovel, because what they're shoveling is human waste. Specifically, everything that's been dumped into cesspits, privies and chamber pots over the past few days. Welcome to the hidden profession that kept Victorian cities from drowning in their own byproducts. Night soil men worked under cover of darkness for obvious reasons. No one wanted to see them, and definitely no one wanted to smell them. They would lift the iron trapdoors behind buildings, or dig into backyard cesspools, and begin the gruesome task of scooping out whatever horrors lay below. And it wasn't just poo. Oh no, cesspits were basically compost bins for regret. Hair, bones, dead animals, used bandages, broken combs, mystery sludge. If it could be flushed or tossed, it ended up there. You watch one man wedge a long-handled scoop into the muck, lift it out, and pour the slop into the barrel. It makes a sound you'll never forget, somewhere between a splash and a sigh. Here's a fringe fact. In some cities, night soil was sold to farmers as fertilizer. Yes, human waste, shipped to the countryside and spread across fields. The urban population literally fed the rural one, in the grossest cycle of sustainability ever devised. Historians still argue whether this practice improved crop yields or simply spread cholera in both directions. The men keep working. They move like machines, scoop, pour, seal. The barrel is half full, and the street already smells like someone tried to cook cabbage in a coffin. You glance at a tenement window. A young boy peers out, eyes wide. His mother yanks him back. Children were told not to watch the night soil men, not because it was inappropriate, because it could scar you. The sight, the sound, the reality of what kept a city clean. You ask a local if the job paid well, he shrugs. Better than factory work. But no one marries a soil man. And that's the truth. Night soil collectors were outcasts. You might tip your hat to a chimney sweep, you might flirt with a butcher. But these men, you crossed the street. They didn't just smell bad, they were bad luck. Some believed they carried disease, or worse, attracted it. Their touch was unlucky. Their breath could make milk sour. If you shook a night soil man's hand, you washed yours in vinegar and hoped for forgiveness. The cart rattles down the cobblestone. The men whistle. One scratches his neck with the handle of his shovel. You try not to think about that too hard. This job was dangerous too. Cesspools emitted methane and ammonia. There were reports of men passing out from fumes and drowning in muck. Imagine that obituary. And it wasn't just small homes. Some wealthier estates had enormous underground waste tanks, so deep that workers had to be lowered in with ropes and lanterns. One slip, and it was over. You think of your own chamber pot, tucked under your bed. One bucket, one person. Multiply that by thousands of homes. Now you understand why London smelled the way it did. Eventually the collected waste would be hauled outside the city and dumped, or processed in poudrette factories that turned human waste into fertilizer pellets. These places were nightmares. Open pits, no ventilation, workers with permanently burned noses. One inspector fainted and claimed the smell followed him for weeks. It probably did. For the worst, the illegal dumpers. Some soil men, too lazy or underpaid, would tip their barrels into rivers, alleys, or abandoned yards. You'd wake up one morning to find a surprise behind your house. The city cracked down, but enforcement was spotty. If you caught someone mid-dump, you could file a complaint. Otherwise, it was just another puddle of life to step around. One more layer of weird. Some night soil men kept souvenirs, not on purpose, just things that didn't belong in waste barrels. Coins, teeth, jewelry. One man found a full pocket watch, another found a loaded pistol. There are even rumors of corpses, though no one could ever prove it. The cart disappears around the corner. The street is wet now, not water, just residue. People avoid that stretch for a few hours, until the smell fades or the wind changes. Kids play elsewhere. The old man at the corner pinches his nose and mutters a prayer. You return to your flat and open the window again. Just a crack. The smell creeps in like it knows your name. You shut it. You lie in bed, pulling the sheet over your nose. You think of the soil men out there, still working, still shoveling, still invisible. You're one chamber pot away from being part of their next haul. You're woken by a sharp cramp. Low, steady, and completely unavoidable. You already know what this is. Your uterus has clocked in for duty. And in Victorian England, this isn't just inconvenient, it's a logistical nightmare. You groan, roll onto your side, and curse the layers of fabric around your midsection. Corset, petticoat, drawers, none of them helpful when you're trying not to scream. The pain's familiar, but the prep? You're not ready. Because Victorian menstruation was less about hygiene and more about endurance. You shuffle over to your tiny dresser and open the bottom drawer. Inside is your menstrual kit, a pile of sanitary rags, a few long pins, and one very hopeful look that, maybe this time, you won't leak through everything you own. The rags are rough, old flannel, boiled thin. They've been reused for months. Some are stained. All are scratchy. You fold one over, secure it with safety pins, if you're lucky enough to own them, and tie the whole setup to a belt that wraps around your waist. This is your period armor. There's no adhesive, no elastic, just gravity and prayers. You sit back down and immediately feel like you're wearing a soggy potholder, which you kind of are. Victorian women didn't talk about menstruation, not in polite society, not in medical journals. It was women's business, which meant suffer in silence. Girls often weren't told anything at all before their first period. Imagine bleeding unexpectedly, thinking you're dying, and your mother just mutters, "Well, you're a woman now," and walks out of the room. Some girls believed their blood would only flow if they disobeyed God. Others thought it was poisonous. One fringe belief warned women never to pickle vegetables while menstruating, because their cursed touch would make the brine rot. No, really. Historians still argue whether this silence protected women or isolated them. On one hand, it spared them from embarrassment in public. On the other, it left them with no tools, no education, and no language to talk about their own biology. You reach for another rag, the first one's already compromised. There were alternatives if you were lucky. Some wealthier women had padded sanitary aprons, or rubber bloomers with built-in pockets for absorbent cloth. Sounds clever, until you remember it's July, there's no airflow, and rubber doesn't breathe. You might as well wear a hot water bottle strapped to your pelvis and call it fashion. There were also menstrual sponges. Yes, literal sea sponges, trimmed to shape and inserted like a tampon. You had to boil them between uses and hope they didn't fall apart mid-summit. Or you used cotton wool, if you could afford it, shaped into little plugs that absorbed just enough to ruin your day. Commercial sanitary products didn't really exist yet. The first disposable pad wouldn't show up until the 1880 SF, and even then, it was wildly expensive. So most women stuck with what they knew: cloth, pins, and strategic sitting. You wrap another rag, pin it into place, and pull on your layers. Every movement now feels like you're carrying a soaked towel in your underpants. You step carefully. The cloth shifts. You feel a leak. There's no backup plan, just long skirts and hope. You head outside and walk gingerly toward the apothecary. Maybe they have something for the cramps. Victorian remedies were mixed. Some suggested warm milk and cinnamon. Others offered laudanum and opium tincture, over the counter. You could knock out your pain and half your motor function with one spoonful. You opt for ginger root tea. The apothecary nods and says it balances the womb humours. He clearly has no idea what he's talking about, but at least it's not mercury. You take the tea home and sip it slowly, curled up in a stiff chair. There's no heating pad. You just hold a hot brick in your lap and hope it doesn't blister you. You try to work, laundry, cleaning, maybe a bit of mending, but everything hurts. Every bend, every twist sends a wave of heat through your lower back. You grit your teeth. You don't complain, because no one's listening. Your friend stops by later. She brings a scrap of clean cloth and a story about a neighbor who supposedly bled for 7 days straight and then went mad. Too much blood in the brain, she says, nodding solemnly. You don't argue. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some women believed menstruation was a release of bad blood that kept them sane. If their period was irregular, they'd seek out remedies like mustard plasters, horseback riding, or, for the especially determined, a mild electrical shock. Because nothing's so soothing like zapping your womb. And yet, women coped. They always did. They whispered to each other, shared rags, gave each other advice in coded language. My visitor, my time, the curse. Men pretended it wasn't happening. Doctors ignored it unless they could profit from it. And still, life had to go on. You wrap another rag, you boil the old one on the stove with lye soap and vinegar. The smell is sharp and sour. You wring it out and hang it in the window, hoping the neighbors won't see. They will, but they won't mention it. That's how it worked. You think about modern tampons, pads with wings, heat wraps, Midol. None of that exists here. Just cloth, pins, and the iron will to keep moving. You lie down with your knees drawn up. The cramps pulse behind your navel. You breathe through them. No one taught you how, but you figure it out. Because Victorian hygiene didn't make space for discomfort, you were expected to suffer quietly, bleed discreetly, and carry on as if your womb weren't staging a full mutiny. You close your eyes, whispering to yourself that it's almost over. 3 more days. Maybe 4. You wake to the sound of thuds, tiny feet thumping across floorboards, giggles echoing down the hallway. Victorian children are awake, and they, like you, are covered in yesterday. You sit up slowly, sore from sleep and still sore from cramps. Outside your window, 2 kids chase each other past a butcher's cart, faces streaked with soot, hands sticky with something sweet. You blink. They look like they've crawled out of a chimney and into a candy shop, which may not be far off. You step into the hall and nearly trip over a child tying a string around a rat. She calls it Albert. It's not her pet, just available. Her feet are bare, her nose is crusted, and her hair is a single matted clump. She waves and scampers off. Welcome to Victorian childhood hygiene, where cleanliness is more of a wish than a reality, and dirt is basically part of the wardrobe. Most working-class kids owned one set of clothes. That's it, a dress or smock, maybe underdrawers, maybe not. And those clothes, worn until they disintegrated. You didn't wash them daily, or weekly. You spot cleaned with spit and a rag, maybe scrub them on laundry day, if your mother had the time, soap and strength. You peek into a nursery. It's not what you imagine. No pastel wallpaper, no soft music. Just a shared bed stuffed with hay and old quilts, a cracked pitcher of water, and a potty in the corner. 4 children sleep head to foot. One's drooling onto a cat. The youngest is scratching her scalp like it owes her money. Head lice were a given. So was cradle cap, ringworm, and something called scurfer, a charming blend of dandruff and sweat caked into the scalp. Historians still argue whether cradle cap was caused by poor hygiene, malnutrition, or just never washing babies' heads. Infants were wrapped in tight swaddling bands for the first few months, sometimes never bathed during that time. The logic? Keep them warm and still, and hope they don't notice the filth. Diapers existed, but not in the modern sense. Rags, flannel, reused, rinsed maybe, and pinned back on. You shudder. Then there's the food. Sticky fingers come from syrupy buns, licorice ropes, treacle tarts, all eaten with unwashed hands that had just petted dogs, scraped gutters, or used the outdoor privy. Germ theory was new, soap was optional, and nobody said wash up before dinner, unless they were rich or delusional. You pass a boy eating a cold potato with dirt still on it. He offers you a bite. You decline. He shrugs. and goes back to chewing. Teeth? If you think adult dental hygiene was bad, wait until you see what kids dealt with. Most never brushed. Tooth powders were too expensive, and toothbrushes were rare. Some families gave kids chalk to chew on, or twigs to rub on their gums. Cavities weren't treated, they were tolerated, until the tooth turned black, or fell out. And skin? Kids' faces were always streaked. Coal dust, snot, food, ink, more snot. Baths were occasional at best. A quick wipe with a damp cloth was all most mothers could manage. One woman boasts that she keeps her son clean enough to pass inspection. That just means he doesn't visibly have fleas. You peek into the schoolyard. The children are barefoot, running in circles, shouting nonsense. One kid throws a dead fish at another. No one flinches. Their games were rough. Stick duels, gutter marbles, pig chasing. And the injuries? Cuts, scrapes, bruises. No disinfectant. Just spit, a torn cloth, maybe a dab of honey or soot. Some mothers believed wounds healed better if you covered them with raw bacon. You step back, trying not to gag. In upper-class homes it's cleaner, but only superficially. The nursery might have lace curtains and painted wooden horses, but the cleanliness was still performative. Nannies were overworked. Diapers were changed on couches. Food was stored near cauldron, and children were dressed up, powdered and paraded around, then dumped in a playroom with lead-painted toys and moth-infested blankets. You visit one such house. A boy in a velvet jacket scratches under his chin as a governess wipes his nose with her sleeve. The carpet smells like damp dog. A porcelain doll stares at you from the corner. Even wealthy children dealt with illnesses that flourished in unsanitary conditions. Measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria. Washing your hands wouldn't cure them, but it certainly could have helped. Still, doctors prescribed fresh air, cod liver oil, and keeping one's windows shut at all times. You glance at the medicine shelf. Opium drops for teething, brandy for colic, chalk tablets for diarrhea. Nothing sterile, nothing helpful, but definitely strong enough to knock a kid out. And still, somehow, they survived. You return to your tenement and find the kids again. One's showing off a scraped knee, another's holding a frog in her apron. The rat, Albert, is missing. You smile despite yourself. Dirty doesn't mean unhappy. These kids are resilient. Filthy, yes, but vibrant. Loud. Alive. You toss the boy a piece of bread. He grins, wipes his nose on his sleeve, and takes a bite. He doesn't thank you, just runs off, barefooted, shouting something about pirates. You sit back down, looking at your own hands, so much cleaner now than theirs, but they've touched the same water, used the same soap, shared the same streets. It's not about better, it's about luck. You close your eyes, still hearing the thump of tiny feet. Tomorrow, they'll be just as dirty, and just as unstoppable. You wake to shouting in the street. It's not the usual noise. No chimney sweeps, no market bickering, no kids hurling dead animals for sport. This is sharper, panicked. You lean out the window and see a crowd forming near the barber's shop. Someone's collapsed. You grab your shawl and head out. The body lies slumped against a barrel, pale and shaking. A young man, maybe 20, clutching his side, groaning. His shirt is soaked in sweat, and he's breathing in sharp, uneven gasps. The barber hovers helplessly with a towel. Someone shouts, "Get the doctor." You follow the commotion down the block and into the world of Victorian medicine, where hygiene isn't science, it's more of an afterthought, with a strong side of guesswork. The local doctor arrives 5 minutes later, still in yesterday's coat. It's stained at the sleeves and stiff at the hem. No gloves, no mask, no tools you'd recognize, just a leather bag and an unshakable sense of confidence. He kneels by the patient, listens for a heartbeat with his ear to the chest, because stethoscopes are new and not everyone trusts them yet, then declares, "Probably an imbalance of humours, could be a blockage of the spleen." You watch as he reaches into his bag and pulls out a lancet, He's going to bleed him. Yes, bleeding. Even in the mid-1800s, doctors still turned to bloodletting, making small incisions to drain excess blood. The logic? Too much blood means too much heat, too much energy. Remove some, and the body rebalances. You know what it usually caused instead? Massive infections, and even faster deaths. Historians still argue how long this practice persisted among so-called respectable physicians. Some clung to it well into the 1890s. Others switched to purgatives, emetics, and blistering agents. Fun fact: if bleeding didn't work, they'd try mustard plasters on your chest, or make you vomit into a bucket. The doctor does the procedure right there in the street. No washing of hands, no cleaning the blade, just a shallow slice along the forearm and a bowl to catch the blood. The man moans, the crowd watches, you step back. Someone mutters that the barber should have taken care of it. After all, he's got razors. But that's the problem. Everyone thinks they're halfway qualified. Barbers, butchers, apothecaries. Aunt Judith with her bag of dried herbs. They all dabble. You walk down the block to the nearest apothecary, the catch-all pharmacy where you can buy anything from peppermint drops to arsenic. Shelves brim with bottles, laudanum, quinine, morphine, castor oil, opium pills. Nothing is regulated, nothing is labelled clearly, and everything smells like wet licorice and death. The apothecary offers you a tonic to cleanse the bowels. You didn't ask, he just assumes. He points to a jar filled with leeches. Very popular, he says. You pass. You glance at the surgical tools displayed under glass. Bone saws, tooth keys, scalpels, all unwrapped, unsterile, and deeply concerning. Surgery in this era is a gamble at best. Back in the tenement, you remember hearing about Mrs. Patterson's operation. She had a tumor, probably an abscess. The surgeon came to her room with 2 men to hold her down. No anesthesia, just a cloth to bite and a bottle of gin to wash the wound. She survived. Her bed didn't. You lie back, staring at the ceiling. Your neighbor's cough rattles through the walls. Tuberculosis, preemptively consumption, as they call it, is everywhere. People cough blood and still go to work, still kiss their children goodnight. The disease spreads like smoke and stays forever. And if you're hospitalized, even worse. Hospitals aren't clean. They're often large, crowded charity institutions run by nuns, medical students, or overwhelmed staff. Beds line the walls. Sheets rarely change. Instruments go from patient to patient without so much as a rinse. Those wear the same coat for every surgery. They think the stains are proof of experience. God's work on my sleeves. They cut without gloves. They don't even wash their hands between amputations. That is, until Joseph Lister comes along with a radical idea. Sterilize everything. Instruments, hands, wounds. He sprays carbolic acid into the air during surgery, and guess what? Fewer people die. But many doctors dismiss him. Too fussy, they say. Real surgeons don't fear blood. You can almost hear them scoffing as they wipe pus from one patient and dig into the next. Lister's antiseptic technique gains traction slowly. Some call it revolutionary, others think it's nonsense. Historians still debate how long it took to really catch on. Too long, either way. You stare at your fingernails. You washed them this morning, kind of, with brown soap and a chipped basin. That puts you ahead of half the medical profession. You visit the local midwife. She's seen it all. Births, infections, injuries. She delivers babies in bedrooms with towels soaked in gin and hands scrubbed with lard soap. She's tough, blunt, and smells like mint and wood smoke. You ask her how many she's lost. She doesn't answer. Childbirth is dangerous here. Infection is common. Midwives are blamed for bad outcomes, even when the real danger is the environment, dirty sheets, cold rooms, bleeding unchecked. You return to your room and find your landlady stirring something on the stove. She offers you a spoonful, an herbal tonic for lady weakness. It tastes like bitter leaves and sugar. Probably useless. Possibly helpful. Hopefully not deadly. stomach gurgles. You lie down. Outside, the street's gone quiet again. The sick man? No one knows. He might recover, he might not. He might vanish into the alley, into a coffin, into a statistic. You turn your face to the wall and think about the last time a doctor washed his hands. You hope it wasn't after lunch. You wake to your mouth tasting like burnt toast and old pennies. It's dry, sour, and suspiciously metallic. Whatever you dreamed about, your tongue still hasn't forgiven you. You reach for water, but it's room temperature and vaguely brown. Time to face the fact. Your breath smells like a haunted fireplace. You reach for your toothbrush. Yep, still the bone-handled one with the horsehair bristles. And remember yesterday's sandpaper scrub. No thanks. You need something stronger. Something to rinse the horror out. Welcome to Victorian mouthwash. Spoiler alert, it's not minty fresh. You dig through your washstand and find a tiny green bottle. The label reads, Dr. Boothby's Breath Invigorator. Beneath that, for foul vapors and decay of the gums. Sounds promising. You pull the cork and sniff. Big mistake. It smells like turpentine with a side of regret. Still, you swish. It burns. Your gums tingle. You almost swallow by accident and see your life flash before your eyes. You spit into the basin, the water goes pink. You're pretty sure your tongue is smaller now. Victorians didn't exactly agree on what should go in a mouthwash. Some recipes called for vinegar and salt. Others used cloves, lemon juice, baking soda, or even pepper. And then there was urine. Yes, ancient remedies involving aged urine as a whitening and antiseptic agent still lingered in some circles. It wasn't popular by Victorian times, but wasn't unheard of either. Fringe households kept it in a bottle. You choose not to ask your landlady. Historians still argue whether these bizarre brews actually worked, or just numbed the mouth into submission. One early chemist swore by a rinse of burnt rosemary water and honey. Another insisted that diluted bleach, yep, bleach, could cleanse the mouth, if you didn't mind losing your taste buds. You take another swig of Dr. Boothby's. It doesn't get better. The pain was common, with no fluoride, no regular cleanings and sugar creeping into more diets. Teeth decayed quickly. Cures? None, really. Just rinse and pray. Or swig a little brandy and wait for numbness. You do that next. The brandy burns less than the mouthwash. You think of all the mouths you've been near lately. Neighbours, shopkeepers, children with licorice-stained lips, and suddenly understand why Victorians didn't kiss often. Courtship involved writing poems, sending handkerchiefs, and never breathing too close. When kissing did happen, it was cautious, gentle, possibly breathless in every sense. You couldn't brush your teeth multiple times a day. You couldn't floss. You just hoped your rinse did enough to cancel out the cabbage stew from last night and the boiled egg from breakfast. Quirky tip. Some women chewed parsley or mint leaves for fresh breath. Some men carried licorice sticks or clove buds in their pockets. And then there were breath wafers. Flat, scented pills that dissolved on the tongue and tasted like floral chalk. You try one. It disintegrates with the texture of sawdust. Your breath now smells like rosewater and old attic. In a moment of optimism, you check your gums. They're pink, sort of, a bit puffy, a little angry. That's normal. Most Victorians lived with gingivitis. Bleeding while brushing was expected. Receding gums? Just part of aging. Tooth loss in your 30s? Inevitable. And once a tooth was gone, your options were grim. You remember the widow down the hall. She wears a full set of wooden dentures, real ones, made from boxwood ivory, held together with springs. When she talks, they click like tiny castanets. When she sneezes, they shift. One time, she laughed too hard, and the bottom half popped out. But hey, at least she had teeth. Others wore Waterloo teeth. Salvaged from the dead. Yes, actual human teeth, pulled from battlefield corpses, or purchased from desperate poor people, then hammered into ivory plates and sold as luxury items. You try not to gag. Back at the apothecary, You ask about a milder rinse. He offers something labeled chlorate tincture with myrrh and nitrate. You ask what's in it. He says, don't ask. You buy it anyway. It smells like cinnamon and tin. You swish again, less pain this time, slightly more taste. You think you're onto something. Then he hands you a flyer for a mouthwash machine. It's a bizarre metal contraption that promises to irrigate the mouth with precision streams. Basically, it's a fancy spittoon that sprays water upward. The apothecary shrugs and shows you his pride, a gold-plated toothpick. Meant to be worn on a watch chain, fashionable, sharp, sometimes used, mostly just looked at. You return home and try a home remedy from the local widow. Boil rosemary, add a pinch of baking soda, swirl it warm. It's soothing, smells nice, doesn't remove plaque, but doesn't taste like regret either. Small victories. Later that evening you lean over a basin and see your reflection. Your teeth aren't white. They never were. They're beige at best. Your breath is tolerable. You didn't bleed this time. You call that success. You sit near the fire with your mug of tea, breath steaming faintly. Your mouth feels mostly like a mouth again, not a burnt root cellar. You don't smile much, not because you're unhappy, but because most people didn't. Smiles showed teeth. Teeth showed poverty, illness, age. Smiling was a risk. You exhale slowly. The brandy and myrrh have settled in your throat. Your mouth is no cleaner, really, just less alarming. And here, that's enough. You're halfway down the stairs when you realize you forgot your socks. Not that it matters. Victorian socks are mostly suggestion. Thin, worn through at the heels, and soaked through 5 minutes after stepping outside. You turn around anyway, because you know what happens when you go without them. Foot rot. Or worse. You grab the scratchy wool pair from your wash line. They're still damp. You hesitate, sniff. Nope. Doesn't matter. On they go. Boots in Victorian England are survival gear, made of leather, usually, sometimes lined with horsehair, sometimes just stiff and unforgiving. No arch support. No padding, just leather, nails, and whatever fungus you picked up last Tuesday at the fish market. You shove your feet in and wince. The left one rubs against a warped sole. The right one makes a squish sound that's deeply concerning. You lace them tight anyway, because even bad shoes are better than no shoes. Outside, the streets are their usual mess: mud, manure, coal dust, and puddles of dubious origin. You step around them at first, then through them, because avoiding puddles here is like avoiding air. Feet stay wet for hours, maybe all day. And that's where things start to go wrong. Your toes itch, that's normal. So's the burning. You pretend not to notice the soft white skin peeling at the edges of your toes. That's not just blisters. That's trench foot, long before the trenches. In an age where socks were a luxury and waterproof boots were for the wealthy, working-class Victorians had few options. Wet feet were part of life, and when you combined moisture, friction, cold, and bacteria, you get rot. Cracked skin, open sores, infections, sometimes gangrene. You sit on a stoop and yank off your boot, your heels raw, your socks stuck. You peel it off slowly. There's blood. Nice. Victorian foot care was minimal. If it hurt, you soaked it. In vinegar, in salt water, in a bucket of herbs someone swore would draw out the bad spirits. That didn't always work. People hobbled through their day, hoping the limp wouldn't become permanent. You duck into a cobbler's shop. It smells like glue, leather, and shoe polish. Rows of boots line the walls, some polished to a shine, others barely held together with wire and willpower. You ask about insoles. The cobbler laughs. Stuff it with newspaper, he says, or sawdust. Warm in winter, soft on the heel. You thank him. You do neither. He does offer you a medicated sock powder, chalk, alum and lavender. It's supposed to dry out damp skin. You try it. It helps. A little. Here's a fringe tip. Some soldiers, Yes, even soldiers were told to rub bacon fat or goose grease on their feet before pulling on socks. It created a barrier, a greasy, smelly, slippery barrier, but hey, it worked better than prayers. Historians still argue how prevalent foot infections were among laborers. Diaries mention limping, missing toes, and the infamous boot stench. One factory report noted that most boys had open ulcers on the feet by year's end. You wince just thinking about it. Women had their own problems. Fashionable ladies wore heeled boots with pointed toes, made of satin or soft leather, beautiful, delicate, and completely useless in weather. They soaked through in seconds. But vanity won over comfort. Girls squeezed into shoes a size too small to appear dainty. Corns, bunions, blisters were practically status symbols. You visit a seamstress, watch her take off her shoes at the end of the day. Her feet are red, swollen, covered in patches of raw skin. She shrugs. They'll harden, she says, rubbing them with vinegar and wrapping them in dry muslin for the night. Children, barefoot, even in winter. You pass a group playing stickball in the street, feet blue from cold, nails black from dirt. One boy's limping. He says it's a pebble. It's probably an infection. He keeps playing. There were remedies, some stranger than others. A common one, soaking feet in urine. The urea softens calluses and kills some bacteria. Gross, yes, but effective. You don't try it. Yet. Another, vinegar foot rubs followed by standing in front of the fire. Just don't get too close. One story involves a woman setting her hem on fire trying to dry her feet. The cure became the injury. You check your feet again that night. They're pruny, sore, slightly cleaner. You dab on some leftover soap paste and wrap them in a rag. You can't afford to lose your toes. You need them for balance, for boots, for walking to the apothecary when your gums start bleeding again. You fall asleep with your feet sticking out of the blanket. They ache in pulses. And somewhere in the building someone's coughing again. Everything hurts. Even your soles. You're in the bakery queue when you notice it. Not a noise, not a sight, a smell. The woman in front of you shifts slightly, and a warm waft of wool, sweat, and something vaguely medicinal floats back. You try not to react. That would be rude. But wow, it's layered. Then you catch your own scent. Less aggressive maybe, but still very much alive. You shift away, but now your boots are stuck to the floor with syrup or some other unidentifiable goo. You sigh. In Victorian England, body odor wasn't just an issue, it was a whole identity. People didn't just smell because of heat or effort. They smelled because society didn't give them any other option. Washing was infrequent. Deodorant didn't exist yet. So people found ways to rank scent, by class, by virtue, even by gender. You shuffle forward in line, holding your breath. The man behind you is clearly a dock worker. His scent is unmistakable. Salt, fish, coal, and whatever lived in his armpits before him. But he's proud of it. Laborers didn't necessarily want to smell clean. They wanted to smell like work. Dirt under the nails meant you earned your meal. A sweaty back meant you were feeding your family. Scent equals survival. But here's the twist. The rich weren't much cleaner. They just covered it better. The woman in front of you is middle class. Lace gloves, neat hat. And still, she smells like perfume over wool over yesterday's bathwater. Because her bathroom routine isn't much better than yours. She might have a maid to bring her water, but that doesn't mean she's using it more often. Her soap, probably made of rose oil and lard. Her scent, a strong floral with a hint of mildew. Historians still argue how much the elite actually bathed. Some letters suggest daily washings. Others hint at once-a-week full-body affairs. But what's clear is this. Scent was a class marker. If you smelled of lavender and powder, people assumed you were refined. If you smelled like you'd been digging coal since dawn, well, you probably had. You get your bread and step outside. The bakery fog follows you, Yeast, flour, smoke. You blend into it, one of many bodies moving through the haze, all of them radiating warmth and scent. You pass a group of factory girls, they're laughing, tossing a ball of string, their cheeks are flushed, their blouses damp under the arms. They don't bother hiding it. They can't. Instead, they dabbed with kerchiefs or tuck dried herbs, sage, lavender, mint, into their collars or corsets. These are called bosom sachets, and they are the 19th century version of deodorant. Smell masking, not smell erasing. You see a boy with a basil leaf tucked behind his ear, a hopeful charm, a poor man's cologne. You catch your reflection in a window. You look normal. Not especially dirty, but definitely not clean. Your skin shines in places it shouldn't. Your underarms itch. Your back feels sticky. And then you pass a butcher, and everything changes. He's scrubbing his apron with a vinegar-soaked cloth. The blood has stained deep into the fabric, but he keeps rubbing. Why? Because he knows how much scent matters. Nobody wants to buy meat from someone who smells like death. Or worse, like old death. He looks up, nods. His breath smells like beer and onions. You nod back. In the countryside it's different. There people reek of animals, straw, unwashed wool. Not better, just different. A woman in a rural village might smell like goat milk and dirt. A man like sweat and wood smoke. You'd still notice, but you might not recoil. Fringe fact. Some Victorians believed that sweating was healthy, proof your pores were working. One medical guide warned against scentlessness, claiming it might be a sign of internal stagnation. You laugh. Sort of. And yet, too much scent was also a problem. Women were shamed if they smelled strongly of sweat, menstruation, or perfume. Men could sweat freely. Women, not unless they were sick or sinful. It was a weird line to walk. Smell like roses, but don't look like you're trying to. You spot a preacher on the corner. He smells like wool, dust, and a faint hint of tobacco. His sermon is about morality. You wonder what his socks smell like. Probably penance. You stop at a water pump and splash your hands. The cold helps. You pat your face. Behind you, a man rinses his armpits with the same water, grinning. You nod. It's communal, after all. You dry off and sit near a bakery wall, taking a breath. That's when you catch a breeze, just a whisper. Someone nearby smells like nothing. Clean, crisp, sharp soak. You spot him, a shop clerk maybe. Young, tidy. His shirt is bright white, his hands scrubbed. You wonder how. A private washroom. A mother with high standards. Access to a rare thing, time. 'Cause that's what cleanliness often came down to, time and privilege. If you had to work 16 hours in a factory, you didn't have the luxury of freshening up between shifts. If you were a servant, you bathed only when your employer told you. If you were rich, someone prepared the water. If you were poor, you shared it with 6 people and a dog. You stand, stretch, and feel the sticky shirt cling to your back again. You pull your collar and let air in. You smell like effort, like hard bread and damp wool, like the street, like the rest of them. And that's the truth of it. Victorian life didn't smell clean, it smelled human, loudly, proudly, and sometimes offensively human. You're back in your room, shirt half off, standing in front of the mirror. You lift your arm. Sniff. It's time. After weeks, months of stench, powders, and lying to yourself, deodorant has finally entered the chat. Or at least, its awkward Victorian ancestor has. But before we get to that miracle in a tin, let's talk about the weight. For most of the 19th century, people didn't think you could do much about armpit smell. Sweat was natural. You masked it with perfume. You powdered the area. Maybe changed your shirt. Maybe didn't. But there was no roll-on or fresh scent marketing blitz. Armpits weren't a problem. They were just unpleasant facts. That changed around the 1880s. You reach into your washstand drawer and pull out a small tin. The label reads, Mum's Deodorant Cream. Soft script, slightly smug. You pop the lid and stare down at the pale, waxy balm inside. You sniff it. Chalky, medicinal, a bit like talc and old soap. Not offensive, not lovely. You scoop a bit with your fingertip and smear it under your arm. It's cool, slightly sticky, and now you smell like the inside of a powdered glove. Progress. Was one of the first real commercial deodorants. Invented in 1888, it came in a jar and was applied by hand. It didn't stop you from sweating, it just neutralized the stench after the fact. Aluminum compounds weren't part of the formula yet. That would come later. For now, it was about smelling less like yourself. The name Mum came from the idea of keeping quiet, because body odor was not a topic for polite company. You stank in silence like everyone else. Before Mum, people tried anything. You pull out a pamphlet you found last week, 10 natural solutions for foul pits. Among the recommendations, powdered charcoal, baking soda mixed with milk of magnesia, crushed sage leaves, and alum stones. You've tried the sage, made your skin itch. The alum helped, sort of, but also made your underarms feel like they'd been rubbed with sandpaper and citrus. Here's your fringe tip. Some Victorians believed sweating was tied to morality. If you sweated too much, it was because your passions were ungoverned, your body unruly. The solution? Pray more, bathe less. Real historians still argue how common deodorant actually became by the turn of the century. Some sources say it spread slowly, limited to middle and upper class women. Others claim ads were everywhere by the 1890, especially in women's magazines. Guilt, shame, soap. You read one aloud. The woman who smells sweetest wears Mum. Catchy, passive-aggressive, classic. Men, meanwhile, were a little slower to adopt deodorant. A musky man was considered manly. Sweat was part of labor, and labor was noble. You could smell like the inside of a boot and still be respected, as long as you tipped your hat. Still, some men used cologne-soaked handkerchiefs under the arms, or rubbed bay rum directly into their pits, and hoped for the best. The braver among them used diluted carbolic acid, yes, the same kind used for cleaning surgical tools. Strong, effective, burning. You try to imagine being courted by someone who smells like antiseptic, cigar smoke and boiled wool. You realize you already have been, last week, at the bakery. You dab on another finger of Mum and wait. It dries quickly, leaves a powdery film behind. You wave your arms a bit to help it settle. There's no air movement. The room's stuffy. But you still feel cleaner. Not fresh exactly, but defended. And that's what deodorant was, a defense. Not just against odor, but against judgment. Against being labeled vulgar, lazy, impure. It let women hold their arms up in church, let men ride the omnibus without clearing it. You sit at the window and watch the world. A woman passes, adjusting the underarm padding pinned inside her dress. Little fabric triangles designed to absorb sweat before it stained the bodice. They were washable, reusable, not always effective, but they worked just enough. Or man walks by with dark streaks under his coat. He doesn't care, or he doesn't know, or he can't afford the solution. You remember reading about odorless people, a bizarre phrase from an etiquette manual. One should aspire to be odorless, not fragrant, not clean-smelling, just neutral, invisible. As if that's even possible in Victorian London. You take a final whiff of yourself. You still smell like soap, a bit of sweat, and something faintly herbal. It's an improvement. Your shirt clings as you pull it back on. The armpits are stained. And now you're part of the club, the few, the proud, the underarm enlightened. Of course, deodorant's not universal. Not yet. Your neighbor still dusts her pits with cornstarch. The grocer rubs lemon juice under his arms. Some still do nothing. But you've found Mum. You've joined the future. Sort of. You settle in by the stove, lift your arm once more, and breathe deep. For the first time in weeks, you don't flinch. You wake to bird song, faint, hoarse, like even they're tired of the smoke. Sunlight filters in through the sooty glass, catching on dust motes and hanging clothes. You sit up slowly. You feel different. Not cleaner, not exactly, but closer to something that might resemble peace. You stand and stretch. Your limbs crack. Your breath still weird. Your boots still smell like pickled meat. But today, you're going to visit someone who claims to have solved hygiene. You dress carefully, corset looser than usual, shirt pinned but not starched, armpits generously dabbed with mum, and make your way across town, through narrow alleys and over cracked cobblestones, past the riverside where the fog smells like fish bones and rust. Arrive at a grand townhouse, columns, polished brass, white gloves at the door, one knock, and a maid lets you in. You've entered the world of the Victorian elite. It's silent inside. The carpets are plush. The air smells of beeswax and lilies. A faint fume of perfume hangs in the hall. You exhale. Finally. Cleanliness. Or is it? You're ushered into the parlor, gilt mirrors, velvet curtains, everything white, cream or gold. Your boots feel blasphemous just standing on the rug. You sit delicately on the edge of a tufted chair. And then you notice it. The smell again, faint, sweet, but with an undercurrent of something not quite right. Mildew, old starch, sweat trapped in silk, dust gathering behind those heavy drapes. Because beneath all the lace, marble and manners, this house has the same problem as every tenement. No plumbing, poor ventilation, and secrets. The lady of the house enters. She glides, literally glides. Her gown rustles like pages turning. Her perfume is thick, gardenia maybe, or powder. It stings your throat slightly. She greets you warmly, her cheeks powdered, lips faintly rouged, but behind her smile is something familiar. Fatigue. Her skin is perfect, but it's makeup. Her gown is crisp, but her underarms show faint stains. Her gloves hide chapped hands. You're not so different. She invites you on a tour. You follow her upstairs, where the bedrooms glow with filtered light. Each bed is immaculate, each washstand polished. And then, she opens a door. It's the bathing room, not a bathroom. No one calls it that. Just a place with a tall clawfoot tub, a fireplace, and a jug of cold water. No running water, no toilet, no drain even. The water has to be carried in by servants and carried out bucket by bucket. A bath here is an event. Hours of prep, heating water over the stove, hauling, pouring, waiting. The lady bathes once a week, maybe twice in summer. Her maid helps her undress, steps aside while she soaks, then scrubs her back gently with a loofah wrapped in linen. It sounds lovely. It also sounds exhausting. You pass a wardrobe filled with hygiene theatre, sachets for drawers, glove powder, hat liners, perfume puffs, scented candles, foot pads infused with herbs. Everything is designed to appear clean, smell clean, suggest purity. But the truth is harder to hide. You sit again in the parlor. A child walks by, dressed in ruffles, holding a doll. She smells faintly of milk and stale wool. Her hair is brushed, but greasy. Her socks are damp at the toes. Behind the walls, the pipes groan. The privy is separate, outside, just like yours. The servants share one chamber pot. The linen closet smells like iron and mould. The lace curtains flutter, but the air is still. The difference between this house and your tenement is presentation, not sanitation. One of the footmen walks by, tall, immaculate, gloved. You catch a flash of underarm sweat as he passes. He doesn't pause. He's pretending not to notice. You do the same. You eat a biscuit offered on a silver tray. It tastes like lemon and dust. And here's your final fringe detail. Some elite homes piped rosewater through small tubes hidden in the walls, to gently mist the parlor and hide less pleasant odors. Not to clean, just to mask. Always masking, always pretending. Historians still argue whether the upper class truly believed they were cleaner or just better at faking it. Diaries reveal obsessions with linen whiteness, breath freshness, hair shine, everything but actual health. Being clean was about looking pure, smelling respectable, not being safe. You finish your tea and take your leave. Outside, the air hits your face like a slap. You inhale, smoke, sweat, wet stone. You walk home through the crowd, workers, fishmongers, nurses, clerks. Every scent you've smelled over the past weeks follows you now, weaving through the air like ghost threads. You pass a baker who smells like flour and yeast, a girl with violets in her pocket, a man with sawdust in his beard. And you realize finally, this was never about filth. It was about humanity, about how people try to control their bodies in a world that gives them so little control. You smile, you adjust your collar, you raise your arm and sniff. Still mum. Still surviving. Now lie back, just let go. You don't have to lace up boots or boil your bath water tonight. There's no chamber pot under your bed, no light in your scalp, just the sound of your breathing and the softness of clean sheets. Real ones. Imagine the steam from a proper bath, warm, fresh, scented with lavender, not lard. Imagine soap that foams, a toothbrush with soft bristles, a towel that doesn't smell like mildew. Let the grime of history fall away. The streets are quiet now, the footfalls have faded, the night soilmen have gone home. You're alone in your room, but not in your time. You've made it back. Your body doesn't ache, your teeth don't throb, your clothes don't chafe. Every part of you feels lighter and cleaner. The past is behind you, heavy and strange. You walked through it, you smelled it, you survived it. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, because silence makes this story worse. And let sleep come gently. The story ends here. Close your eyes, drift deep, sweet dreams.